Police of Reddit, what is the worst crime scene you've come across? Story 1. Didn't see it firsthand, but saw some of the scene photos of a 23-year-old guy that was babysitting his girlfriend's daughter while she was at work. The guy got drunk and the little girl. She was less than a year old. The guy realized how horrible he was immediately after because he put a bullet through his head. The mother came home from work to find her bloody baby in the boyfriend's lap with the contents of his head sprayed all over the baby and entryway. The little girl lived but was in critical condition for weeks. The shitbag boyfriend had penetrated the girl's abdomen. Doctor was certain she'd never be able to have kids. She should be in high school by now, 15 or 16 I would guess. Story 2. Little girl tells her school nurse it hurts to pee. This leads to her making statements indicating molestation, so they send her to the hospital and call me. Sane nurse confirms there is trauma to her vagina. Because she is a child, I cannot ask her questions. We set up a forensic interview with people trained to deal with this so it is less stressful, but I can listen in while she is talking to doctors. I hear her say, when I'm bad, mommy and uncle bad touch, name changed for privacy, stick fingers inside me. So now I go find mom, expecting to hear complete denial. Nope. She tells me as a form of punishment she inserts fingers into her 5-year-old's vagina. Her brother who lives with her does it also. I wish I was making this up. Before you ask, the case was sent to the county prosecutor. I haven't heard anything from it since, which means she plead out, it was dropped, or it's still awaiting trial. Story 3. I saw 4 guys blown away with an AK-47 that had a double drum clip. One guy's face looked like the Predator's. I had a 9-person shooting another time. Last month I cut a lady down who hung herself from the 3rd-floor balcony. The neighbors on the 2nd floor found her hanging outside their porch window when they woke up for work. I probably have been to at least 20 shootings. Not sure what the worst is. I have seen a few jumpers. The worst calls are about children. I have seen a few killed by cars, saw 2 people tied to chairs. One was shot. The house was set on fire. The one who lived was the one who was shot. That was a bad call, but I am a firefighter, so I don't know if this counts. Story 4. I've seen some pretty gruesome murders and accidents. Saw a woman stabbed over 50 times. A guy whose head was completely caved in by his steering wheel. Plenty of suicides via shotgun to the mouth. The one that stands out to me the most wasn't fatal, and it wasn't even that gruesome. Some guy got high on PCP and thought everyone was a demon. An older woman, early 60s woman, was driving by and he decided to fight her. Pulled her out of her car and pummeled her face, knocked her teeth out, bruised her face real good, and gave her brain damage. She was conscious throughout the entire ordeal and I was the first on the scene. It shocked me because she was minding her own business when this asshole decided to ruin her life. It was random and unprovoked. If I'm not mistaken, she had to quit her job due to memory issues from the brain injury. On top of that, we had to fight the guy for a good 3 minutes until we got him into custody. He was a big guy and got roughed up pretty well, but he was feeling no pain at all. My taser had absolutely no effect. We only got him into cuffs when 6 officers held him down and pulled his arms into place. He then proceeded to spit blood on us. Story 5. An older coworker told me this one. A man lived in an apartment with his 3 kids and wife. He goes to work and comes home at night when one of his kids comes up to him and says, I saw mommy kissing the neighbor's pee-pee. He slit each of his children's throats while they slept and cut his wife's head off. Left it on the kitchen table and smoked a cigarette calmly after calling 911 on himself. Said seeing the kids in their beds covered with open throats covered in blood fucked him up for a long time. Story 6. I know a guy who is a jail guard and he also worked in TBS, the Dutch equivalent of a jail for people with severe mental health problems. There was this schizophrenic guy who was convinced he was a dog. Now that might just sound sad and pathetic, but the guy bit someone in the throat and shredded his jugular. He tried to do it in jail as well, and he now has to wear a muzzle 24/7. Story 7. A guy high on PCP went over to his adult sister's house right before they left for a family birthday party. As the family is packing the car up, the guy remains behind in his 7-year-old niece's bedroom, still high on dust. His niece forgets something in her room and runs back upstairs into the apartment. As soon as she reaches the apartment, she hears a gunshot. She walks into her room and sees her uncle prone on the floor, bleeding profusely from the back of his head. Brains all over her bedroom wall. The family calls 911. I show up, walk in, and assume the guy is dead by lack of movement and loss of blood. Find the gun, make it safe, and out of nowhere hear a huge deep breath and see the guy's chest moving. With half of his brain blown apart, the guy was still alive for at least 10 minutes but unresponsive. The medics transported him to the hospital where he died, but donated his organs. In the end, it's the little girl who will live with that picture of her uncle for the rest of her life. It would be nice if you could take every kid out of every bad situation so they have a fighting chance to live a normal life. I have another story. A suicidal female walks to the top of a 9-story hospital parking garage, does a backward swan dive off the top trying to kill herself, ends up landing on both of her feet, which takes all the impact. Every bone from her feet up to her first rib is shattered, but somehow she was still alive as I got there first. Looked like a slinky as EMTs picked her up from the ground to transport, which in the end was futile. But for the few minutes I was on scene with her, I was able to speak to the woman who was still conscious. The most peaceful and quiet conversation I had with a person who knew they were dead. Story 8. Not a cop, but I did body removals for the private ambulance company I worked at. We got a call at 4 a.m. and our dispatcher asked us if we had 2 body bags. Story 9. Not an officer, but my father was a detective in the middle of his career. He told me of a crime scene where someone had hacked up his wife's head with an axe. When they went in, the family's dog was licking up blood and brain matter. Story 10. I recently went on a ride along and got to hear a number of stories that happened here in Portland. The absolute worst story was regarding a woman who had died in her home. The police arrived, cleared the home, and found the woman laying in her living room. The neighbors hadn't seen her for a while, so they believed she had been there for a number of days. She also had a dog, and when the dog got hungry, it started to eat her face. Her cheeks were gone, and the skin was around her neck and forehead. They started their regular procedures when the cop I rode along with thought he heard something and examined her closer. She was breathing. It was faint, but she was absolutely breathing. A stroke or some sort of brain aneurysm had paralyzed her and taken her speech. She had to lay there and literally have her face eaten off her by a dog she couldn't feed. She died later in the ICU. Story 11. Not a policeman, but I know a former forensic scientist. She described a case one time where a father of 2 didn't receive custody of his kids after the divorce. He flipped out and kidnapped his kids. A homeless man handed in 2 plastic bags into a police station a few days later of body parts that had been cut up. She had to reassemble the kids' bodies so they could be identified. Story 12. Not a cop, but I am in college to become one. One of my professors at the time worked homicide as a lieutenant at the precinct and brought in crime scene photos all the time to show us on the projector. One was of this 17-year-old kid who'd had his head caved in the early 2000s. It was a pretty big case at the time in Philadelphia. He worked construction part-time and walked home every Friday with a couple of $100 in cash for his pay. His best friends, 1 girl and 2 guys, all in the 16-18 range, wanted to make a quick buck. The girl lured him to this regular meetup spot for sex out near some woods. When he started taking his clothes off, the 3 friends jumped him. The 18-year-old guy, if I remember right, had a hammer, and his brother had a cinder block. Kid didn't stand a chance. His parents had to identify him based on the clothes he was wearing because there was practically nothing left of his face or hands, defensive wounds. The brother got tried as an adult and got 25 to life. The 18-year-old got life, and the girl got 15 for ratting out the other 2. Story 13. Probably the 4 suicides I've worked. My very first, a man who had recently been diagnosed with terminal cancer decided to prematurely end his life. He jumped in the early morning from a 5-story parking structure. He landed in such a way that his brain pretty much popped out of his head. When we found him, his brain was fully intact. Story 14. Not my story, but a friend's. He receives a call and responds about a single vehicle crash with only 1 survivor and 2 victims. Here's what happened. 3 high school students and childhood friends were driving to a gun range firing area. The one in the back had a shotgun in his hands. They go over a pothole, and the shotgun fires and instantly kills the driver. The driver's dead weight hits the gas and they slam into a tree. The passenger, wearing no seatbelt, is ejected through the windshield and impacts a tree, breaking his neck and crushing his skull. They were 2 weeks from graduating high school. The surviving friend now attends therapy, is medicated, and has attempted suicide at least once. Edited to add a story. My mom works in the mental health field and treats people with severe conditions. She began treating a police officer who is severely traumatized from a crime scene he was called to. Here's what happened. He receives a call from a woman crying hysterically. He responds to the home and walks in. The woman's husband is standing over her dead son, the man's stepson, and this guy is rooting, cutting the kid's body apart with a knife. He's also muttering to himself. There's a shotgun and 2 expended shells on the floor. Apparently, this guy, who was a severe alcoholic and drug user, hit it pretty well. However, he also had paranoid delusions, and after going off his meds, became convinced that his stepson was being controlled by miniature aliens living inside his body, and it was his duty to find these aliens and kill them. So he called his stepson into the kitchen and killed him with 2 shotgun blasts to the chest, and then proceeded to try to find the aliens. The mother returns home from work, sees what happened, and immediately dials 911. Apparently, this guy had killed the kid hours beforehand and had been picking at his body and shit for the entire afternoon trying to find the aliens. The sight of her cowering and him standing there laughing made my blood boil. Fortunately, he violently resisted arrest. He didn't think he could be arrested in his own home. The most frustrating scene was the rape victim who was too afraid to name her attackers because they were connected to the IRA, that feeling when you can do nothing to bring such a heinous man to justice. Story 16. My father was a cop for 25 years. He's seen some shit in his time. Here's what he thinks was his worst crime scene: a domestic murder where a husband attacked and killed his wife with hammer blows to the head. She was discovered by her children, ages 4 and 7, who told their neighbors, who called the police. He was found on an industrial estate nearby in his car, having expired through breathing exhaust fumes. Worst accident scene: a 7.5-ton goods vehicle lost control on a motorway, crossed all 3 lanes, and went through the central reservation, hitting several vehicles on the opposite carriageway. One of these vehicles was a Mercedes Sprinter van. The impact flattened the Mercedes from the driver's side across the vehicle's back. The passenger walked away with a minor head injury, and the driver's body had been stretched to approximately 9 feet long due to the impact force. The occupants of the 7.5-tonner were both dead. The impact being on the front driver's side corner diagonally across the cab, the driver was decapitated from his chin up, and the passenger was decapitated from the middle of her nose up. Extracting the remains was. Hey, if you like the video so far, consider subscribing and liking the video for more. Story 17. No longer Leo, but was for 17 years. The worst case I came across was the murder of 2 young children ages 8 and 2. Our good friends lived next door to my partner. We were pretty close to our friends, and at this time my first daughter was born. One of the nice things about our friends was that we could get some really nice hand-me-down clothes from their 2-year-old daughter. One night my ex-wife received a phone call from our friend. She was in hysterics over an argument between her and her husband. They had gone to the bar, one thing led to another, and etc. He had gone to his parents' house to cool down. She did not know what to do and wanted my advice. I told her everything would be okay and to let things calm down a bit. The usual fix is to calm someone down immediately until you can go over and assess the situation when everyone is sober. The next day we went over and they were talking by phone, hashing things out. Things seemed better without the alcohol. The next day, I received a call to go assist the local FD on a structure fire with entrapment. Another officer was on the scene taking control of the scene, and one was in custody. Not my partner. I was working OT on another squad. The structure fire was at our friend's house. My heart dropped. Both the 2-year-old and the 6-year-old died in the fire, and our friend was arrested for their murder. I talked to my partner later. He was very distraught over the entire thing. At the time, I knew nothing since I was not there but assigned to traffic control. I asked him what had happened. He told me that he received a knock on his door and it was our friend. She told him her house was on fire and her children were in the bedroom. He ran and got his ladder, climbed up to the bedroom and busted out the window. He couldn't make it inside due to the heat. He then tried the front door and still could not make it up the stairs due to the heat. After learning about fire safety years later, I'm glad he couldn't make it into the room. He would have died too. The fire department arrived and was able to get the 2 children out, but it was too late. The firemen even said the temps were unbelievably hot in the room and they had difficulties making entry because of it. During the investigation, I did not investigate but still heard about it. We learned that the rescue attempts were in vain. They were dead before our friend knocked on the door to my partner's house. Our friend continued to argue with her husband on the phone. At one point, he said if they got divorced, he would take custody of the children. Our friend went to the gas station and got some diesel. She had the children go to bed early and in the same bed. When they were asleep, she poured the diesel all over the room, down the hall, down the stairs, all the way to the front door. She lit the diesel and went to the side of the house closest to their room. She listened as her 2 children screamed for help, yelling "Mommy." When the screaming and crying stopped, she went and knocked on my partner's door. She estimated she waited 30 minutes and even smoked a cigarette while she was waiting for her children to die. To this day, when I talk about this incident, I can't hold back the tears. I have talked about this numerous times when people ask what is the worst thing I have ever seen as a police officer. The aftermath was devastating for me also. After the autopsy, the young girl's lungs were placed in evidence in our evidence freezer. You could not see them. They were sealed in plastic, stored in a couple of metal tubes, and marked as such. Every time I had to place or retrieve evidence from there, I had to see these containers. Also at the time, my ex-wife and I were having our own problems. Then the letters started coming in. I found out they were writing to each other as she was awaiting trial. My ex even said she wants to go visit her. Some of it was for the curiosity of why she would do this, and others to be supportive of her during this time. I couldn't believe this. The anger I had over what she had done was burning hotter than molten steel. When I found out what my ex was doing, just took me beyond any anger I have ever felt. I could not understand, and years later still can't. And please don't explain her psyche to me or stick up for my ex. Just like those 3D photos of the 90s where the picture is a bunch of flowers, yet people see a sailboat. I just don't get it and truly don't want to. Anyways, as I said, my ex and I were already having problems, and this sent me over. I should have handled it better and been more adult, I know, but I lost all love and respect for her and started to do things a husband should not do. As you can tell, we are no longer together. It's not an excuse for my behavior. I own that 100%. As I said, I should have done things differently. Story 18 to 4 uncles were sexually abusing 2 minor females. None of the uncles knew the other 3 were doing it. Of course, now that the young girls are in their 30s and have denounced the actions of their uncles, they've been banished from the family for telling the family secret. Story 19. My partner and I got a tip from a narcotics source to check out an abandoned bowling alley for some activity. It was the middle of the day, so we didn't expect anything to be going on right then. We called in and pulled up from the back entrance to have a look around. Lo and behold, there were heavy chains on all the doors except for one side door, where the chain had been cut with an angle grinder or something similar. The bowling alley faced a fairly busy highway, so our first thought was that local drug dealers were using it as a convenient stash pack spot, or that there were squatters inside. We pulled our weapons and flashlights, called for another car, and went in. We came in from the side, looking across the lanes, about even with the scoring terminals. A quick look around, and it was obvious that people had been there. Empty beer cans, cigarette butts everywhere, and some boxes of sandwich bags sitting out on the little tables. The place smelled like 20 years' worth of cigarette smoke, mildew, wet wood, old plastic, rusty metal, and musty seat cushions. It was a very familiar smell after Katrina. I don't remember who saw her first, my partner or me. There was a woman at the far end of the lanes, away from the door and hidden from the front windows. She was in an orange dress, the skirt pulled up around her waist and the top pulled down under her breasts. She was lying on the floor between 2 benches as if she were passed out drunk, a young black lady. She was wearing very dirty sandals with gold-colored straps and little fake jewels across the tops. Her skin was dark, shiny, and blotchy and contrasted sharply with the soft, bright orange material. Her head was completely removed, crudely and raggedly as though it was sawn off. We stared at her for a few seconds, taking it all in, the colors washed out somewhat by the harsh beams of our bright taillights. All my partner could muster was the word, "God damn." I barfed into my mouth before the smell even really registered. The scene turned out to have been a couple of days old, and the metallic rotting smell was turned up to 11 by the midday heat trapped inside the building. There was a huge pool of blood around her torso and neck, almost black and blending into the dark industrial carpet that was between the lanes and the snack bar. Her limbs were grotesquely swollen and flung outward, the straps of her sandals digging into her feet. Backup pulled up right as we staggered back through the side door into the harsh sunlight. It was our supervisor and the young officer he was FTOing. We explained the situation, and he called for more units and the coroner so they could secure and begin processing the scene. We put some Vicks on and went back to look behind the snack bar and the counter where the shoes are. The sergeant found the lady's head on the floor behind the snack bar. Her teeth were showing as if she were growling, and her eyes were swollen and puffed out. There were several squadrons of flies and gnats buzzing around the head. She was wearing a wig which had partially come off, and the whole thing was almost comical, like a wax head where the details weren't quite right, but my brain kept screaming at me that this was a person's head. It felt like all the emotions I could possibly feel were fighting together in my stomach. I've seen hundreds of corpses throughout my career, but this one is burned into the film of my memory. We continued to perform some mundane functions at the scene for a little while, but once others started arriving, our LT sent us back to the office to start writing up our notes. The investigation later revealed the woman was a prostitute. She was involved with a drug dealer who used the bowling alley for business purposes and to entertain clients. I think the story came to be that she was offered as payment to another drug dealer from Central America, and this person murdered her while he was having sex with her, right there on the floor. He slit her throat with a knife and continued until she was fully decapitated, either during or right after the rape. I think I remember that the suspect was identified, but I know he was never caught. This was, by far, the worst scene I ever saw firsthand. You can share your own story in the comments below.